Imagine this. A group of overconfident aliens kidnaps a young human woman, thinking they've scored an easy ransom. What they didn't know? She's the daughter of the most feared man in the galaxy, a legend who once ended a war over a breakfast dispute. Now he's coming. Not with an army, just a spoon, a ship, and a smile that means doom. This isn't just revenge. It's a masterclass in why you never ever mess with Earth. If you are new here, then please subscribe this channel and show thumbs up by liking the video. Now let's move toward this wonderful story. Captain Groblek was having one of those days, the kind that made him wish he'd taken his cousin's advice and opened a food truck instead of joining the intergalactic navy. He stared at the blinking red alert on the ship's command console and slowly turned toward his assistant, Lieutenant Snarp, who looked like he had just eaten a plasma grenade and was regretting everything. You did what? Groblek's voice was as calm as a swamp just before it explodes. Lieutenant Snarp's many eyeballs darted around nervously. We, kidnapped a human female. For ransom. You know, leverage. For leverage, Groblek repeated, his slimy forehead pulsing dangerously. You kidnapped a human. One of them. Snarp tried a hopeful grin. It didn't help that his teeth were shaped like tiny corkscrews. Yes, but we were very polite about it. We even gave her a pillow and a cup of tea. Oh, well, in that case, Groblek said, deadpan. I'm sure the most unpredictable, trigger-happy species in the universe will totally overlook this kidnapping. Probably send us a thank you card. Snarp gulped. She said she liked the tea. Groblek turned away, mumbling to himself about incompetence and reassessing his life choices. Then he stopped cold. He whipped around and leaned in close to Snarp, who shrank back, regretting every decision that led to this moment. Who exactly did you kidnap? Snarp looked down at his data tablet and squinted at the notes. Lila Miles, age 28. Earth origin, daughter of, He squinted harder, then turned pale, which was impressive for a being made of blue goo. General Orton Miles. There was a silence so heavy it felt like gravity had doubled. Groblek's gelatinous skin shivered. You mean the Orton Miles? The one who ended the Battle of Rascon 4 by himself? The man who once negotiated a peace treaty with a flamethrower in one hand and a kitten in the other? That Orton Miles? Snarp tried to melt into the floor. Yes, that one. Groblek staggered back to his command chair, slumped down, and pressed his head into his tentacles. This is the mistake of the century, he muttered. We are so dead. Just then, the ship's navigation drone beeped and chimed a cheerful warning. A small vessel had just exited hyperspace right in their flight path. Small, sleek, and human. It was broadcasting no greeting, no threats, just silence. Snarp pointed at the screen with a shaking tentacle. Maybe they just want to talk? Groblek laughed, a wheezing, hopeless sound. Oh yes, sure, he probably just wants to ask for a recipe or borrow some sugar. He stood up, straightened his uniform, and stared at the screen. Brace for war. Meanwhile, deep within the brig of the Zorgari ship, Lila Miles was sipping her tea and humming a tune. She looked utterly calm, which was unsettling to her guards. One of them whispered to another, "Shouldn't she be panicking?" She asked for knitting needles, the other guard replied. I gave her a spoon, the first said. She sharpened it, the second added, eyes wide. As Lila finished her tea, she sighed. Dad's going to be here soon, she murmured to herself. They never learn. Back on the bridge, Groblek's crew watched nervously as the human vessel drifted closer. Then, without warning, the comms crackled. A voice, deep, calm, and somehow terrifying, echoed through the bridge. This is General Orton Miles. You have my daughter. I'm here to collect. No shouting, no threats, just a quiet statement of fact. But it hit harder than any torpedo. Snarp squeaked, "Can we say sorry?" Before Groblek could answer, the brig lit up in red lights. A guard's voice shouted over the intercom, "She's gone! She escaped! With the spoon!" As panic erupted, Groblek sighed and turned to his crew. All right, everyone, if you need me, I'll be in the escape pod weeping softly. Then the alarm screamed. The human ship was boarding them. Orton Miles stepped onto the Zorgari ship's main corridor with all the serenity of someone who could vaporize an entire squad while fixing his collar. He didn't bring an army. He was the army. Lila strolled, up behind him, brushing her hair out of her eyes. You took your time, she teased. Traffic, Orton replied. Next time, text me before you let yourself get abducted. Next time, she grinned, I'll just hijack their ship. Myself? As the two humans walked calmly back to their vessel, the Zorgari ship behind them began to explode, sections of the hull collapsing as systems short-circuited from sheer terror. Inside the Zorgari escape pod, Groblek watched the chaos unfold. He looked over at Snarp, who was curled into a ball. Next time, Groblek whispered, let's kidnap something safer, like a black hole. And just like that, the galaxy learned yet another lesson that it would soon forget. Never, ever mess with humans. The Zorgari ship floated in space like a wounded beast, lights flickering and systems stuttering after the disaster that was Operation Human Hostage. Captain Groblek, curled into a corner of his escape pod, was seriously considering switching careers. Maybe flower arranging, something with less screaming. But the real story wasn't in the Zorgari ship anymore. It was in the sleek silver vessel parked directly in front of them, silently blocking their flight path. It had no flashy weapons, no squadron of escorts, and it wasn't broadcasting a single threat. But every alien on that ship knew exactly what it meant. General Orton Miles had arrived. Inside the human ship, the bridge was calm, almost cozy. The ship's artificial intelligence, Toasty, hummed softly to itself while cycling through old Earth jazz playlists. Orton Miles sat in the command chair, posture relaxed, eyes half-lidded. His face was a map of old battles, scars, burns, and a single deep line that stretched from his right brow to the edge of his jaw. One cybernetic eye glowed softly, scanning incoming data. He stirred his tea with a small spoon. Toasty's cheerful voice broke the silence. General, incoming transmission from the Zorgari vessel. It sounds panicked. Orton sipped his tea. Put it through. The screen lit up to reveal Captain Groblek, his eye stalks twitching with terror. General Miles, we didn't know. If we had known it was your daughter. You did know, Orton interrupted calmly. You just didn't think it would matter. Groblek stammered. Please, we gave her a pillow, and she liked the tea. There was a long pause. Then Orton asked, where is she now? At that very moment, Lila Miles was on her way to the hangar. She had, after all, escaped the brig an hour ago using only a spoon and some casual indifference. Most of the guards had been too confused to stop her. One even offered her directions. As she rounded the corner, a Zorgari technician tried to block her path with a clipboard. You're not authorized to be here, he said nervously. I'm not even supposed to be here, Lila replied, flicking the spoon in her hand with a quiet twang. The technician decided to take an early lunch break and ran off in the other direction. Back on the bridge, Orton's cybernetic eye flickered. She's near the hangar, opening bay doors. He gave Toasty a subtle nod. Toasty chirped, welcome back, Miss Miles. I warmed up your seat and reloaded your music playlist. Lila's voice came over the internal comms as she stepped onto the ramp. Thanks, Toasty. I rate today's kidnapping experience a 6 out of 10. Good tea, poor planning, and very few snacks. Orton's lips twitched. That was his daughter, calm, dry-humored, and somehow always in the middle of galactic chaos. The moment Lila stepped onto the ship, the ramp closed behind her. Orton stood and made his way to the entrance. She raised an eyebrow when she saw him. Took your time. He glanced at the clock. I was early, you escaped late. She handed him the spoon with a grin. For the collection. He took it without question and slid it into a panel labeled Spoils of Ridiculous Battles. The Zorgari ship tried to send another message, but Orton muted it with a flick of his fingers. Lila sighed as she sank into a chair. Are they still talking? Yes, Orton said. But we're not listening. Toasty chimed in. Should I prepare the diplomatic exit protocol, General? Orton nodded once. Proceed. Outside, the human ship began to rotate smoothly, aligning itself with a nearby star lane. On the Zorgari ship, alarms went off again, not because of a weapon, but because the human ship was charging something no one had ever seen before. A strange energy signature built up around it, humming softly, almost politely. Snarp, who had returned to the bridge after a brief fainting spell, stared at the readings. What's it doing now? Groblek stared at the data and whispered, It's leaving. Just like that? Snarp gasped. Just like that, Groblek muttered. It's done what it came to do. As the human ship vanished into hyperspace with a smooth, flickering pulse, the silence left behind was more terrifying than any explosion. The crew stared into the void where the ship had been, not sure whether Tobe relieved or horrified. Meanwhile, aboard the human vessel, Orton settled back into his chair. Lila had her feet up, playing a simple game on her datapad. Toasty hummed a lullaby it found in a 300-year-old Earth archive. Orton looked over at his daughter. This is the third time in 2 months. She didn't look up. What can I say? I'm popular. You're dangerous. I'm your daughter. Orton grunted but couldn't hide the small smile. The ship coasted quietly through space, their next destination still unknown. But one thing was certain. Wherever they went, someone was about to learn a very painful lesson. Because in the vast, unpredictable galaxy, there was only one thing more dangerous than a human warship. A human with a spoon and a reason. High Chancellor Fringle hadn't slept in 3 cycles. His office smelled faintly of stress, panic, and burnt tangroot tea. A dozen holograms floated in front of him, each one more troubling than the last. Reports were flooding in from across the galaxy, military fleets being rerouted, governments going into lockdown, and entire systems suddenly deciding to upgrade their defense budgets. And the cause of all this chaos? One human. Well, technically 2. A retired general and his daughter. But really it was humanity as a whole that had the galactic community on edge. Again. In the center of the Grand Council chamber, Fringal adjusted his shimmering purple robes and addressed the assembly. His crystalline voice rang out clearly, though it trembled slightly. Esteemed representatives, we are gathered today to address the growing human problem. Dozens of eyes, feelers, orbs, and other assorted sensory organs turned toward him. They are unpredictable. They are powerful. And they have now responded to a kidnapping with no formal declaration of war, no paperwork, no negotiations. Just a single ship and a calm demand, Fringle said, showing footage of General Orton Miles's arrival. And then they left. Quietly. A few council members nodded in agreement. Others looked terrified. Ambassador Myrn of the sponge-bodied Pliblick species bubbled nervously. I heard he once talked down a Reaper-class battlecruiser while making pancakes. That's a lie, muttered someone from the corner. Actually, it's true, whispered another. I read it in Tales of Terran Madness. Fringal raised his hands. The point is we must decide how to handle this species before they dismantle galactic politics through sheer stubbornness and bad metaphors. Several voices shouted over each other. Sanctions, isolation. Maybe we block their space Netflix. The room descended into bickering. Every solution was worse than the last. Someone suggested building a giant wall around Earth. Someone else proposed launching them into another galaxy. One council member yelled something about disguising all planetary atmospheres as poisonous gas clouds. Finally, a small, nervous voice cut through the chaos. Excuse me. Everyone turned toward the back, where a young council aide named Wibby stood. He was barely taller than a suitcase and had a soft, jelly-like texture that rippled when he was nervous, which was often. I was just wondering, Wibby said, fidgeting. Has anyone ever tried being nice to them? A long, confused silence followed. Nice? Fringal repeated as if Wibby had just suggested hugging a black hole. Wibby gulped, but continued. Well, we've tried threatening them. We've tried insulting them. We've Tried tricking them, but none of that works. They just adapt or they blow something up. But has anyone ever just invited them over for tea? More silence. Then a cautious voice said, "Is that a metaphor?" "No," Wibby said. "I mean, actual tea." The absurdity of the idea hung in the air. Then, slowly, the laughter began. First one delegate, then another. The council chamber rang with the sound of amusement and disbelief. But Fringal didn't laugh. He watched them all carefully. And then, to everyone's surprise, he cleared his throat. "As ridiculous as it sounds, it might be worth a try. The Laughter stopped instantly. "I beg your pardon?" croaked the ambassador from Thornac 6. Fringal raised a translucent hand. "Think about it. If they keep reacting unpredictably to hostility, perhaps it's time we offer something they don't expect. Peace, hospitality, snacks." "Are we really hosting a tea party for Earth?" someone muttered. Fringal nodded solemnly. "Yes, but we'll call it something more official. Human Appreciation Day." Wibby lit up like a glow stick. "Can we have cake?" Within a week, the preparations began. A neutral planet, Delphor Prime, was selected to host the event. Decorations were shipped in. A galactic buffet was prepared. Several species needed tutorials on how to brew tea, since many of them had never heard of leaves being steeped in hot water for enjoyment. Gift baskets were assembled with earth-friendly offerings, ranging from hand-woven scarves to small, non-poisonous fruit. An invitation was sent to General Orton Miles and Lila. It was worded very carefully to avoid any suggestion of apology or bribery, simply calling it a celebration of Earth's unique contributions to interstellar society. To everyone's surprise and slight horror, they accepted. On the day of the event, the council stood in the glowing plaza of Delphor Prime, nervously holding drinks and practicing smiles. When the human ship entered orbit, several dignitaries fainted. The ship landed with a soft hum. The door opened, and out walked Orton and Lila side by side. Orton wore his usual simple coat. Lila wore sunglasses and a curious grin. The council gasped in unison. One alien actually dropped its bouquet and squeaked. Orton surveyed the crowd and nodded. "Nice setup," Lila whispered to him. "Are we sure this isn't a trap?" "If it is," Orton replied. "At least they brought cake." The event went surprisingly well. There were some hiccups, like the moment an Andorvian tried to high-five Lila and knocked over the punch bowl, or when the Pleblic choir's song about human bravery sounded suspiciously like a love ballad. But nobody was vaporized, which was considered a massive success. At the end of the day, Wibby shyly approached Orton and asked, "Did you enjoy yourself?" Orton looked down at the jelly-shaped aid and nodded. "Yes, this was unexpected. In a good way." Lila smiled. "And the tea wasn't bad." Wibby beamed so brightly that nearby plants started to photosynthesize faster. "Does that mean we're friends now?" Orton raised an eyebrow. "Let's call it a good start." And just like that, the galaxy shifted. Not with war, not with conquest, but with one very awkward, surprisingly successful cup of tea. The sun above Delphor Prime was beginning to set, casting a soft orange glow over the wide plaza where the first ever Human Appreciation Day had just wrapped up. Tables were covered. In crumbs and cups, gift baskets had been exchanged, and awkward hugs between species with wildly different numbers of limbs were still taking place. It had gone better than anyone expected. No shouting, no vaporizing, not even a mild diplomatic insult. Lila Miles leaned against a snack table, sipping something that was probably tea, but smelled suspiciously like engine coolant. General Orton. Miles stood nearby, deep in quiet conversation with High Chancellor Fringal, who had begun to look a little less like someone about to suffer a nervous breakdown. "You understand?" Fringal said cautiously. "This wasn't just about smoothing things over, it's about rethinking how we handle, well, your people." Orton nodded. "I get it. You're hoping we'll stop blowing things up if you start inviting us to parties." Fringal chuckled nervously. "Something like that." Orton glanced over at Lila, who was teaching a young crystalline alien how to fist bump. "Well," he said, "you're off to a decent start." At that exact moment, alarms started to blare from the security towers on the edge of the plaza. Lights turned red, sirens wailed, and dozens of peacekeepers began scrambling for their comms. Lila frowned. "Dad, was it something I said?" Orton looked up. His cybernetic eye whirred. "No," he muttered. "It's something they said." A massive alien fleet had just dropped out of hyperspace above Delphor Prime. Hundreds of ships, bristling with weapons, blocked out the stars. They belonged to the Anti-Human Alliance, a loose coalition of species who believed that if the galaxy didn't do something about humans soon, it wouldn't survive the next century. Their lead ship opened a channel, and a deep, crackling voice filled the air. "People of Delphor Prime, turn over the humans now, or suffer the consequences." There was a moment of frozen silence. Then Orton, completely calm, turned to Fringle. "Mind if I borrow your microphone?" Fringle, too shocked to respond, just handed it over. Orton stepped up to the center of the plaza and tapped the mic. "This is General Orton Miles," he said, his voice booming across the crowd and into space. "We just had a lovely afternoon with representatives from dozens of species. There was tea, there were cookies. And now you want to ruin that, Hiar?" Paused, letting the silence stretch. "I'll make this simple. Turn around, go home, or I will come up there and personally teach you what we serve at a Terran barbecue. Spoiler alert, it's you." Several ships in the enemy fleet hesitated. A few started to drift backward. But one particularly large cruiser fired a warning shot, an energy blast that missed the planet by a few miles but made its point. Orton sighed. "Why do they always choose the hard way?" Lila tossed him a small controller. "Want me to warm up the cannons?" "Not yet." The ship Toasty, still parked quietly behind the stage, suddenly came online. "Oh no," it chirped through the comms. "Looks like we're having uninvited guests. Should I deploy the surprise welcome fireworks?" Orton grinned. "Do it." The plaza's floor split open as hidden panels retracted, revealing sleek turret launchers, energy shields, and several devices that looked suspiciously like modified kitchen appliances, but had glowing red cores. Toasty's surprise fireworks launched into space, small, fast, and unpredictable. The enemy fleet was not ready. Ships began swerving to avoid the sudden barrage, and a few unlucky ones lit up in spectacular displays of colorful fire. The crowd below gasped, then began cheering. Lila stood beside her father as explosions bloomed above them. "They never learn, do they?" "No," Orton said, "but they make great practice targets." In the middle of the chaos, a tiny voice piped up. "Excuse me?" It was the young crystalline alien Lila had been fist-bumping earlier. His name was Zarni, and he looked up at her with wide, gleaming eyes. "Yes, Zarni," she said, keeping one eye on the sky. "Can I join your crew?" he asked. "I want to learn how to make tea and, not die in space." Orton blinked. "You want to come with us?" Zarni nodded. "I've been studying humans for my science project, and you're very exciting. Dangerous, but exciting." Lila grinned. "Please, Dad? Can we keep him?" Orton rubbed the bridge of his nose. "You feed him, you clean up whatever he leaks." Zarni squealed in delight. Within an hour, the enemy fleet limped away, having learned the hard way that diplomacy and tea were far less painful than facing off against one well-prepared human warship. Delphor Prime returned to peace, slightly, scorched but more united than ever. As the ship Toasty rose into the atmosphere with Orton, Lila, and a bouncing Zarni aboard, the galaxy took a deep breath. Maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something new. Or maybe it was just a short break before the next intergalactic misunderstanding. Back in the plaza, a confused alien reporter stared into a camera and said, "And that concludes Human Appreciation Day," which ended somehow with explosions, a tea recipe exchange, and the adoption of a crystal intern. We'll be back after the break. Because in a galaxy this strange, peace isn't the absence of war. It's just the time between one tea party and the next invasion.